Welcome to the weekly podcast, which looks at every aspect of something which has or will at some point affect us all. And that is grief. Whether you've lost a loved one or are about to lose someone you love, or perhaps you're simply trying to support someone navigate their grief and don't know where to start or what to say, then perhaps this is the podcast for you. I'm Venetia Quick, and each week I'll be bringing you different stories and experiences of loss, love, hope, and at times humour. Starting off this episode on what is National Grief Awareness Week. Now, the purpose of the week is to encourage people to be more grief aware, also to encourage conversations around something, I guess, that is for many still uncomfortable to talk about. And it's run by the Irish Hospice Foundation, and Dr. Amanda Roberts is their Bereavement Development Officer. You're very welcome, Amanda.
Thanks a million.
And I suppose, first of all, well done on such an important initiative. Like, I know it's the fifth year that you've done this, but focusing this year, I guess, on helping people through their grief, but also just as importantly, trying to help somebody who is supporting somebody going through a bereavement, which is, you know, as I said, as important.
Yeah.
What can we start maybe by looking at, though, why, when it's something that happens to all of us at some point, it's still so uncomfortable to talk about?
I suppose one of the things is, I remember doing up a stat, or someone telling me a stat, and that 6% of the Irish population are newly bereaved every single year. And it's such a commonplace experience that people go through, but we don't talk about it. It's like you're guaranteed death and taxes. With a death comes a bereavement. And what we know, in and around about 10 people are significantly impacted by every single death that happens in Ireland. And I suppose the fact that it's still a taboo. Do you know, we don't have it in our school systems, we don't have it in our workplaces, we don't really talk about it. And we did some research a couple of years ago, and it asked people, members of the public, do you feel comfortable talking to people about a bereavement? Or if someone is bereaved, a friend or family member, do you feel comfortable talking about it? And a high proportion of people weren't. They were afraid of making people cry, just feeling uncomfortable. And then when you surveyed people who are bereaved themselves, they said, I feel like people are avoiding talking about it. Do you know, so both sides of the coin, people are struggling. And
it's strange, really, because, you know, as you said, 6 in 10, every year. But also the fact, in my experience, and just, you know, by reading stuff online or reading the papers or whatever, or seeing interviews on TV or whatever, it has become much more of a conversation. Like, you do see at least one article a week about somebody's grief or whatever. Whereas 4 years ago, there was nothing.
Yeah. And an interesting thing around COVID, it really did bring death and bereavement to the fore. Like during COVID, on the back end of that, the bereavement support line was set up in the Irish Hospice Foundation, and we got funding from the government to do that. So because kind of bereavement was to the fore.
So there was never a bereavement support line before?
No. This is a national, it's a national bereavement support line. So anyone who's bereaved, it doesn't matter who died or how the person died, it's a listening service. But there wasn't one before that.
Which is amazing, really, because we support lines for everything else.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wonder, is it because with COVID as well that it affected so many people, and unfortunately so many people did die during COVID of all ages.
Yeah.
You know, and that sort of maybe made it more universal and more in everybody's houses.
Yeah. It was among everyone's kind of conversations, daily conversations. So people were kind of talking about it a bit more.
Do people who are grieving, so they go, the grieving process, I guess, in my experience, is that they tend to seek out, maybe subconsciously, people who have gone through the same thing, to chat to, whatever, who may not have been somebody who was very close to them before, but now suddenly is, because there's sort of a comfort in that the other person has that understanding. Is that another reason that other people may find it uncomfortable because they feel they're being pushed away, or they feel that perhaps they don't have enough grief to understand for one.
A lot of people kind of say is they're really surprised who actually are actually the support people after someone dies. They're surprised by the people who think that I know that person will definitely be there for me if something like this happens, but when it does happen, they're not. And then the most unlikely of people end up being the most supportive people for them. And I suppose when you talk about needs after bereavement, some people feel that need to connect with others who are bereaved, and a lot of people might, whether it's in their circle, someone that might have had a similar experience, or some people might feel that need to go outside their circle of family and friends and just be with someone that they don't feel so alone in it. They just want to feel some sort of connection and feel, oh my God, someone's gone through something similar to me and they're still standing. Do you know, it gives sometimes people a bit of hope. They don't feel so alone.
Yeah, I think it is weird, because I think, you know, especially very soon after bereavement, when you start to sort of venture out again, I guess, or sort of, get back into sort of real life, and you do sort of, you might be around a million people, but you are on your own, in your head. You might be in a completely different place with a big smiley face on, but that's not what's really going on inside. And it is sort of that thing where you feel completely separate, and you do sort of go, well, you know, I really like you, but you don't have a clue what I'm going through. And you do sort of, I think, tend to sort of not deliberately push people away, but you just struggle with finding that perhaps the same sort of closeness that you had before, because that connection is gone.
It's gone, And I suppose as well, it's the relationship you have to the person as well. I remember talking to a lady whose sister died and her best friend died in the same year. And I remember her saying, look, I don't really know my sister that well. She moved to the States when I was 12. Had a couple of phone calls during the year, might see each other every second year. But my best pal was my neighbour. We grew up together. We had went to school, had our kids and steps and stairs. So when my best friend died, that had such a significant impact on me when compared to my sister died. Which said I got all this overwhelming support from people after my sister died, but no, my grief wasn't really acknowledged, and that was a loss that was significant to her, because they'd go for the coffee after they dropped the skills to school. So that's where that loneliness and that alone piece felt, because it was that gap in her day that was so routine that she was with the friend that there was now a gap.
And there is that as well. It's like, I remember my own, like after Martin died, and again when you might go out and you have to go out to something, it was the coming home and sort of not being able to sort of say, oh, you never guess what so-and-so did, or the funny story or something that you both have got a laugh about previously. And that's when it's sort of, or going on holidays was another one. I remember saying to a friend of mine when her husband passed away, just be careful when you come home, because when you land at Dublin Airport and then you go home, it's, sort of, because there is a tendency to, I think, run. I remember sort of every single sort of holiday or sort of long weekend, right, where can we go? What can we do? Because you're escaping from this sort of reality, but then reality hits you the minute you come back.
I remember my husband saying to me our dog and his dad died within it's about a year or two of each other. And I remember him saying, okay, look, the loss of my dad was really significant, but you could sometimes push it out of your mind and, you know, and just kind of not forget, but kind of put it to the side, do you know, because he used to see his dad once a week or something, where he said, I come home from work, the minute I walk in the door, the loss is hitting me in the face because there's no one bouncing at me. I usually had my walk in the evenings with my headphones to chill out and zone out and, you know, cope with the day. That's gone now. So I remember him comparing the two. You know, they are different losses, but I remember him saying, look, this one hits me more because more regularly. Do you know, even though the intensity of his losing his dad was intense, but he could, like you said, compartmentalize.
And I'm sure if he said that to somebody, somebody said, oh, I'm sorry about your dad, and hey, I hear your dog died as well, that shit, you know, but I'm sure if anybody heard, if he said to anybody, oh, but I really miss my dog, people would just say, God, you're right.
You
know. And is that how, I suppose our grief is influenced? Is it how we're supported, by who we're supported, or is it really down to who we've lost and what they meant to us and meant in our lives?
It's loads of different things. It's all of those things. It's how close we were to that person, how much of an impact that person not been in our day-to-day lives is going to have on us. It can be how we generally cope with things. If we're a person who, I'm a bit of a walk or talk person, so I'll walk and talk. Someone would maybe, I know that my hubby would put on the headphones and go for a walk. So we all have our own kind of different coping skills or coping styles. So that will kind of have an impact how we experience a loss, but also the way we, the support we have around us. Do you know, as you said earlier, there's some key people that we have, and not everyone has it. For the most part, I know when we look at kind of research and passions and how people cope with the bereavement, everyone has needs, whether it is a cup of tea and a chat with a friend, whether it's help with their finances because their partner always did the finance bit. So everyone has needs.
Yeah.
And for the most part, we cope with the support from family and friends around us. And about 40% of people need support outside that family and friend circle for lots of different reasons. It could be the type of death we've experienced. It could be the relationship. It could be there's loads of stuff going on for us and we're getting overwhelmed. So we just need a bit of help. So there's loads of kind of different reasons why we do and the way we react, And we always kind of say to people, look, the way you react is unique to you. I remember someone saying to me, it's like a fingerprint. It is unique. There are some similar passions. And kind of when that comes into play is family members. I don't know, like after a death, there could be a lot of kind of conflict and dynamics going on, because I remember chatting to a lady and she was saying, look, I'm just a crier. I get upset. My sister just doesn't cry. And she's like, I just don't think she cares. Do you know? But it's not until they sit down and have the conversation and you find out the sister's not a crier. She's coping in different ways. Yeah. And then the other sister's like, she's just crying all the time. She just, she's not coping. But that was the way she processed and released her grief. So
they do it differently. Yeah, but I was going to ask you about that as well, because if, somebody, as you said, crier, gets it all out, excuse me, but then somebody else, they don't want to talk about it. They never talk about it. They never appear to get upset. And you sort of go, well, they're not really. There's the other side. You think, oh, they're over it, or they're not grieving at all. Yeah. How does somebody help somebody like that, or support somebody like that?
And I suppose we kind of have some key things for people, and it's around acknowledging the loss. What we find is, I know I talk about research and surveys, but it's a great way to get a sense of passions and talk to people about their experience. But what we find is what's really important to people is an acknowledgement that the loss has happened. I remember chatting to a lady who worked in a hospital and her husband had died. And when she went back to work, not one person mentioned the death. Do you know? So whether it is kind of saying, I'm really sorry for your loss, whether it is a note or a card or a text, it's just some acknowledgement that this big thing has happened. And I know when I had a loss in my personal life, I remember emailing my boss saying, look, this is what happened, this is what I'm going through, don't talk to me about it yet, because I'm not able. I want to come into work because I need the structure, but I'm just not able to talk about it. And so if people come up to you, you can kind of say, look, thanks, because they might say, look, sorry for loss. You might go, look, thanks, I'm not able to talk about it at the moment, but thanks a million. And you get a sense of people if you acknowledge their loss, whether they want to talk or whether they don't.
Yeah, and I think that
you're guided by them.
Something to look out for as well. But I'm just wondering if somebody is like that, where they appear to sort of not be dealing with it, how far is somebody trying to support them should go, or what they should do.
And it depends on your relationship with the person. Do you know, you'd react very differently to your child when you compare to a work colleague. You know how they normally respond to things, and you get a sense that way. And the thing is, you can't push people either. Do you know, if you think someone needs support, they won't go and get it unless they need it, or if they go, it's not going to be any use unless they want to do it. So it's around kind of being there, being present, and letting them know that you're there. I know one of the big things is, when people say, let me know if I can do anything for you. Sometimes it's around, like say that to people, but also if you know the person, as in cook a meal. Or if that's something that, have that sort of
randomly,
relationship. If you have that sort of relationship. I remember someone I knew who really struggled going to the school to pick up the kids, because they're like, I know I'm going to meet someone at the school and they're going to say something and I'm just going to get upset. So what we did as a group is, look, do you know what? We'll pick the kids up from school for a while and then you let us know. Do you know? So sometimes you kind of get a sense of, oh, I know that person so well. I know they'd actually probably find this helpful. Or sometimes it could be, let us know if you need something. And sometimes it's like, Friday morning, I've nothing on. Do you want to go for a walk and a talk on the beach or something? Do you know? So it's around trying to be a little bit concrete as well.
And consistent, probably.
Sometimes, or even if someone, particularly if someone's offering to support or help you, you can it's okay to say, I don't know at the moment, but will you ask me again in a week or two? Because I just don't know at the moment. And so I suppose from the both sides of the coin, it's, as a bereaved person yourselves, sometimes you haven't got a clue what you need.
No, because you're in that blur where it's just...
And it's just like, and if you can, take all the offers of the meal, throw it in the freezer.
Yeah.
Do you know? Because some days you might be able to cook, another day you're like, I'm just not able to do this. And to have something in the freezer. Yeah,
and I think as well, I think down the road, a few months later, when sort of... I don't want to say when the dust is set, but you know what I'm saying is that sort of people start getting on with their lives. And I like one thing that, most people are conscious of is maybe after somebody's died, the bereaved person's first Christmas without them, their first Easter, their kid's first birthday without them, whatever. And that's always the first anniversary since I went. That's always sort of zone in on that. Okay, I need to text, And quite often in all the waves of grief, which we'll talk about in a minute, is the sadness, or everything comes, the train comes before the actual big anniversary or whatever. And then on the big anniversary, you're totally fine.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, why is that? Why is it because we build ourselves so much up to... Because it's Christmas, I'm not going to be able to do Christmas. Martin Love Christmas, for example. I can't do it. And then actually on Christmas, you're fine. Because...
And for some people, that's their experience. And then other people, they really struggle with it. And for some people, the second year is a bit harder or has its own challenges. Do you know?
I think for sure it is.
And people kind of think...
Absolutely.
It takes about a year. Do you know, I remember chatting to someone and they had a stillborn child. The child died in around the time of birth, and I remember there was this expectation that it's been a year now. You should be over it, and you're kind of going, their child died. Do you know? But that, it's what people say. I had, well, at least he didn't die in hospital, and he's at home. And the other very classy one I got, but look, you're only young. You'll meet somebody else. And it's, if you can ever give anyone... I found quite... And if you ever give anyone advice, it's like, please don't start a sentence. At least. Because even on the opposite of your experiences, I remember chatting to an older gentleman, and he was married, something ridiculous, 70 years. Like, they got married when they were about 17. And I think I met him when he was in his 80s. And I remember him saying to me, they keep on saying to me, at least you had so many years with her. And he's like... But I actually don't remember my life without her. Do you know? And it's just like, I'm really struggling when people say that to me. And he was a real gentleman, do you know? And he's like, I swear to God, I'm going to blow up at the next person that says it to me. Because he's like, I know people think they're trying to be helpful, but it's like, I don't know life without her.
Yeah, I think this is where the whole sort of fact we get uncomfortable with it comes from. And like, look, I remember I think it was the first time I actually went, okay, next time say nothing, because I went to a funeral and it was of a young person and I hadn't met one of the parents before, and I remember sort of being introduced to her and I was like, oh hi, how's it going, because I didn't know what else to say, and afterwards I was like, you were such a do you know what I mean, like why did that come out of your mouth? But it's because it's that sort of nervousness. And
yeah.
this leads into the whole fact we get so uncomfortable.
And it's trying to fix it or take away someone's pain or try and, you know, if someone's
Say
upset,
the right thing.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just in there.
Yeah.
Do you know? And not doing anything.
Yeah. And just sort of going, look, there's nothing to say.
And like when you talk about the older gentleman, for some people, that might have been actually nice to hear. You know, that might help them cope with their loss, going, I had 70 years with them. Do you know? And they hold on to that. Do you know? And that's something that helps them. But for him, it wasn't helpful. Do you know? And it's kind of, that's why we always talk about the fingerprint. It's like something that one person might find helpful isn't helpful for someone else. Do you know? And it's around just understanding that and acknowledging that. And you might not say the right thing sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
And that's okay too.
And sometimes you might say something and you go, oh my God, sorry, I said that. Do you know? It's just like, and people, it's that understanding and that compassion and that.
But like as he said, it's so, I mean, grief obviously manifests itself in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And I remember once I was asked by somebody, you know, what it was like. And my initial reaction was like, it's like splitting up with someone you're mad about when you're younger. Because first of all, you're devastated, then you're a bit lost, then you're really angry. And then maybe feel a bit of guilt about something or not. And it's sort of the same for a lot of people.
Yeah. I suppose there's hundreds and hundreds of emotions. There's probably not that many. And that happen when that you can experience when someone's bereaved. And not everyone experiences every single emotion like the next person. Do you know, some people might experience guilt. Some people might experience relief and feel guilty about experiencing relief. Do you know, so there's so many different emotions out there. But yeah, there is common passions. So there are a chunk of emotions that most people experience after a loss. And
is there any right way or wrong way or no?
And I actually read something recently and it said sometimes it can be really unhelpful to say there's no right or wrong way. And I was kind of going, I need to read this. I'm not sure what this means. And it was like, there are some wrong ways, as in if someone's using maybe alcohol or drugs or something to try and cope. Yeah. So there are some, if it's going to harm you or harm others, do you know, you maybe need to look at it and it's probably not a good way for you to cope with the loss. But there isn't, like, everyone is just so different, and whatever way they experience and whatever way they cope. I remember chatting to a woman who used to visit the grave every single morning, and it was like 2 years down the road, and people are going, do we need to look at that? And she's like, I walk my kids to school. I actually walk by the graveyard on the way home, walk through the graveyard, say hi to mom, and then keep going. Do you know, whereas someone who lived in Kildare and their grave was in North Dublin and they're going to the grave every day, they're late for work, they've lost their job. Do you know, so it's very different. It's like putting a context around kind of how someone is expressing their grief or coping with their grief.
But I think, like, whatever way, like, obviously, as you explained, some ways are not the most ideal, but whatever way people choose to express it is right for them.
Yeah.
And other people have to accept that.
Yes. And it's very hard if you express or experience your grief completely different to someone else, because then you think, why are they doing that? Like, people sometimes can be a bit kind of egocentric, as in, this is the way everyone experiences it. Or, you know, I was in the same family as my sister. We had the same relationship with my parents. Why is she reacting that way? Do you know? So it's around that understanding, because I remember chatting to that lady whose sister was completely different to her, and I remember her coming back to me weeks later and said, we're actually getting on a bit better, because now I can go, that's the way you're dealing with, this is the way I'm dealing with. And just because you're not crying doesn't mean you didn't care. And that is the thing. Like, if you know, as you were saying at the beginning, sometimes it's the people in your life you really expect to be there to the point that you can't get rid of them, that just aren't. But then they're going through their own grief, and you come to a realization at some point that that's the way they grieve, and you've got to let them do that and understand that, you know, and that might take a while, you know, and I think it's timing and giving the people that's grieving and the people that's also grieving but trying to be supportive time as well. Because I remember this woman, her her husband had died, and her daughter was about, I think, 15 or 16 at the time. And she said the daughter's afraid to ask, was she okay? Because she's thinking, she looks okay, she's having a good day, I'm not going to mention Dad because I don't want to upset. And then she was like, the daughter, she's having a good day, I'm not going to upset her,
so
we're not going to
say anybody.
So what they end up figuring out doing is they had this little pin. So if the daughter was open to talk about it, she'd have the little pin on. So whenever they had the pins on, they knew the two of them were okay to talk about it, or they wanted to talk about it, because they were too busy protecting each other. Do you know that they both actually wanted to talk about it, but they just were afraid of upsetting each other?
That's such a really, like that I think will help just so many people as well, because that's going to be, you know, there is that sort of like don't mention the war. Do you know what I mean? And not mentioning a certain person by name sort of idea like is huge.
And it's mad when you think about culture. I remember I was in Australia and my uncle was introducing me to a lady whose husband had died, and she was an Aboriginal lady. And I remember, you know, one of the first things I do, I don't know whether it's just something I do, I ask, what was their name? And she immediately started getting upset and just really, really reacted. And it was only afterwards I discovered when the person died, you don't mention their name within their culture. It's bad luck, and so even like, I suppose,
or is it's encouraged here, like that say is their one name, of the keep saying their name.
So even, I suppose, because Ireland is becoming more multicultural, it's around raising our awareness of
different cultures.
Yeah, we're not going to know everything about every single culture, but if we know where to go to find out a little bit of information about it, you know, if
absolutely.
A new friend or something you've made and they've had loss in their life.
With the so-called stages of grief, and you know, the perception there's 5 or whatever. They say
7
that
or 9,
7 or 9, or you know, it's a grief tree or pyramid, whatever. Is acceptance is supposed to be one of the most difficult. But I've been thinking about this sort of the last few days of how do you know when you've accepted somebody has died, and does that mean your grief is gone? So I was thinking that, like, you know, Martin is gone nearly 7 years, and I sort of, you know, sort of doing okay, and last few months have been grand to a point, you know, and I just went, does that mean I've accepted that he's gone? Does that mean the grieving period is over, or is that just for now, and what happens if it comes back?
Sometimes people never accept. Do you know, you learn to live with it. Do you know,
but is that the same though
as
accepting? Or is acceptance when you just stop, or do you ever stop? I
think there's this kind of idea around that your grief kind of shifts and changes over time, and you grow around your grief. I was chatting to actually a lad yesterday, and he had a family loss, a significant family loss in his life, and although it was a tragic death, and what he did, it's been a couple of years now since the death, and what he ended up doing was developing, or he's trying to develop bereavement support through football. And he's developed a social entrepreneur company to try and develop this idea further, because he found through his experience, he was in a football team and played for a football team, and people didn't know what to do or how to support him, but football was his life. And he just said, and it's kind of this idea of like growing from your grief, do you know, as in, yes, all the negative things, you miss them and it's painful, but sometimes there's that little element of growing from it, something kind of shoots off from it, whether it is a podcast, whether it is
a foundation or whatever. And that's probably, I mean, just from chatting to other people, why so many people go down that route is somewhere to channel their grief, but also to keep the person's name alive, and to, I guess, let their death do some good. You know, by whether it's raising awareness or money or funds or whatever it may be.
But even like my father-in-law an example is he used to love Scots clans, you know, the
Oh,
sweets, right? And the first Christmas,
the sweets that give you feelings.
I used to walk at Christmas time. I couldn't walk by a Scots clan, you know, because I'd be just like tears and crying. And it's only now, you know, a couple of years later that, you know, now I chew a Scots clan and I think about the time when he did this or did that, you know. So it's kind of things.
It's
change.
a nice memory.
Yeah, where initially it was it triggered pain.
Yeah.
Where now it triggers comfort.
Yeah.
Do you know, so your grief changes.
It does.
Over time.
Yeah, and you sort of get more enjoyment from...
Yeah, you're able to, at the time you're not.
Something.
But
No.
it's not until, you know, you're able to look back on certain
But I guess
things.
that's the same as certain places or certain, like, sort of saying, I could never go there again because that's where we do our honeymoon or whatever. And then you start going, do you know, I'd sort of like to go there, or I'd like to bring the kids there and show, you know, so it does.
And people do get scared. You ever hear these things called grief bursts? You kind of alluded to it with waves. And people, like sometimes you could get a year or 2, 3 years later, you get overwhelmed and so upset and you're like, what the hell is going on? And it could be something simply, do you know what? It's just not a good day for you. And you smelt their aftershave on someone that walked by. Or, do you know, a song or something that you're not expecting, where maybe a week later you smell their aftershave and you're actually fine.
But that's also related to your mood or what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, if you're...
And the thing is, people sometimes think it's a linear process. Do you know, you just get, it eases over time.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's like waves.
But that's, I was just about to say, on your website, on the Hospice Foundation website, there's an amazing little... I think it's a gorgeous little video. Like, it's only about 3 minutes long.
Donal in the boat.
Donal in the boat. And I've watched it a few times now because it's just, you know, I had a few tears at one point because it's so accessible and it's so relatable and just really explains in 3 minutes what grief is.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we do a lot of kind of public information talks. And we talk about all these different ways you could try to understand grief. And there's so many different ways between the waves, between, like there's this idea of you dip in and out of grief. And this idea of continuing bonds, as in the person's not physically there. You don't have a physical relationship, but you can still have some sort of relationship with the person when they're physically not there anymore. Whether it is they have an influence of when you make a decision or something, just so there's still some sort of bond there. And people, different ideas resonate with different people. So for some people that waves thing would really resonate, where someone else might go, yeah, that doesn't make sense to my experience. Do you know? So it's kind of putting a couple of things out there and seeing what helps different people.
And it also really explains the 2 different types of coping, which I thought was really interesting as well. And actually interesting if kids wanted to watch it because it's sort of like a cartoon, you know?
Yeah.
So from that point of view, if somebody is listening, I mean, obviously this week in particular, you are really reaching out to people who are trying to support somebody they love who's lost somebody or going through grief and really perhaps is struggling themselves with that because they haven't had that experience, or perhaps they have but they don't know how to get it across. What would you say to those people now?
I suppose the key things, it's around the things that we were talking about earlier, is like asking, making concrete offers. It's around letting them know that you're there and been present. If someone is struggling, and you think, do you know what, maybe they need something outside family and friends, the bereavement support line is great. It's not just for people who are bereaved. You could ring up and go, look, I have a friend and this has happened and this is what's going on. Like, what do you think? Sometimes you just need to talk it through with someone that is a little bit more, maybe more informed, or has a little bit more kind of information around bereavement. So for example, some of the supports out there around Ireland would be trained volunteers. They're not counsellors, but they're trained volunteers and they meet people one-to-one. So they'd have a lot of information around all the different ways that grief can affect someone. So maybe that person might be experiencing something that's quite normal for them because of their experience, but at least you can talk it through with someone. I'd probably give them some information. The bereavement support line, there's loads of leaflets or a business card. So even saying, look, are you okay? I'm a bit worried about you. this is here if you want to chat. I'm here if you want to chat. Because sometimes people don't want to talk to their friends and family. They're there. But sometimes you just want to talk to someone that doesn't know you at all. And so maybe that might help them. But it's around, I suppose, signposting them to, look, I don't know if I'm a little bit worried. This is why I'm worried. And this is out here I'm here, but this is what's out there.
Yeah.
If you would like to. Also, the GP can be good as well. We developed with the Kildare Bereavement Network a leaflet for GPs, and it lists all the bereavement support services in Kildare. So it's trying to make information accessible to people, because sometimes
for everybody, for both. Yeah,
because some people think you either cope or it's counselling. Do you know? But there's a lot.
Yeah.
Like for some people, I know a common thing people would say is, I feel like I'm going mad. And what people sometimes find, it's just reading an information leaflet to say your memory's affected, your concentration, your appetite, your sleep.
And sometimes your muscles as well can just...
Yeah.
You suddenly develop all... I sort of remember thinking I was turning into complete hypochondriac because I was like, my arms feeling a bit... or what, and I'd never been like that before, and until I read that it's a stress thing.
And like the thing is, sometimes it's go, look, maybe get it checked out to make sure.
Because
it might be that 1 in a million where there is something going on, but sometimes it's reading that leaflet, knowing this is painful, this is horrific, but it's normal.
Yeah,
this can happen. That can be reassuring. Sometimes people would prefer to go to see maybe a trained volunteer and get that information off someone and talk it through. But for some, reading it on a website and reading that information in a leaflet is enough for them. I'm not saying it takes away pain, but they do need their family and friends around them. But sometimes it's that reassurance, I'm not going mad.
Look, you can find out everything this week on your website, hospicefoundation.ie.
And just the bereavement support line, it's 1-800 80 70 77. And it's also for professionals, because you might be a social worker in a hospital and you're looking for a support service for someone. And just even ring up the support line, it's for you as well. To say, look, I'm looking for something in this particular area. Do you know of anywhere?
So for anybody at all who wants to get in touch, everything's on the website, and the National Grief Awareness Week runs until the 2nd of February. Amanda, thank you.
Thanks a million.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. You can find us on SoundCloud and wherever you get your podcasts every Tuesday. You can join our online community on Facebook, The Grief Pod, or on Insta @GriefPod Series.